Okay, I'm going to jump right in here. I'm joined by Silent Spring's Executive Director, Julia Brody, and Nancy Koehn. Nancy is a historian at the Harvard Business School, where she holds the James E. Robeson Chair of Business Administration. Koehn's research focuses on how leaders, past and present, craft lives of purpose, worth, and impact. Her latest book, and it's terrific, is called Forged in Crisis: The Power and Glory of Leading in Turbulent Times. It spotlights how 5 of history's greatest leaders, including Rachel Carson, managed crisis and accomplished extraordinary things. Welcome, ladies. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Meredith.
So, Nancy, let me start with you. There are so many leaders that are women that you could have chosen for your book. Why Rachel Carson?
Well, I mean, Rachel really chose me. So I stumbled on her story, the story of writing Silent Spring, which was not her first book. It was her 4th, and a book she undertook initially unwillingly through a set of circumstances. And as soon as I got hold of the story of how she wrote the book and the demons and the obstacles she encountered in that writing, I was completely hooked. I was also hooked by the fact that Carson was a quiet and shy and retiring person, gentle and loving, and someone who preferred walking the Maine coastline to, clattering her heels along the corridors of power, someone with no handlers and no publicists.
Not what you expect from a leader.
Not what we think of when we think
right.
of, hard-charging, charismatic, brilliant at public speaking kind of leader. And I thought, this is a story I need to uncover.
And what you mentioned, the obstacles, what obstacles was she facing?
So Carson, who many of you may know something about, had been a best-selling writer in the 1950s. She had published a couple of books, beautiful, extraordinary books, about the majesty and the science of the ocean. The first book was called The Sea Around Us, and then it was followed by a second bestseller called The Edge of the Sea. And so when a series of letters and different folks brought the issue of pesticides and their relationship to the environment to her attention in the late 50s, she was like, oh, no, I don't do whistleblowers. I don't do muckraking. I write about the romance of nature. And then, so the first obstacle was, this is taking on a huge vested interest. Chemical companies, the USDA, which had approved billions of dollars in aerial spraying of pesticides like DDT and heptachlor, and just the basic idea that I've got to challenge the presumptive operating ethos, which says that it's on the onus of the public to prove that it's unsafe. Otherwise, let's just spray the hell out of the country. And I thought, that's really interesting for a shy and retiring poet/scientist. And then I started picking, if you will, peeling away at the onion layers of the story. And then I learned all the while she was writing the major portion of the book, she was battling metastasizing breast cancer. And I was like, sign me up for this story.
Yeah. You yourself have dealt with breast cancer twice.
Yeah, I'm a 2-time breast cancer patient. So a lot of the research, reading her letters, picturing her, feeling her in her study in Silver Spring, Maryland, in those late nights working on the book, dealing with the uncertainty, because when she was first diagnosed with breast cancer, and this is before chemotherapy, my friends, so if she had been diagnosed today, she would be with us here, and very appreciative of what's happening and enthusiastic about what's happening at the Silent Spring Institute. She didn't have that. She had radiation, and when she got her diagnosis in the fall of 1960, an oncologist at the Cleveland Clinic named George Kreil said, he didn't quite say get your affairs in order, but he said, the clock is running, Rachel. Go to. And so the book was written in a really determined, extraordinarily brave attempt to outrun the clock and get the story that Silent Spring tells out.
And she did not want anybody to know that she had cancers because she didn't want them to think that's why she was exposing the chemical companies.
I see, that just blows me away. That still blows me away, the bravery of she only told her publisher, a couple of dear friends, and her literary agent, a woman named Marie Rodell, that she had breast cancer because she didn't want anybody in a position of power to think that this was a vendetta journey.
Right. When you use the title Forged in Crisis to talk about these leaders, what was her crisis that led her to go from being the introvert, the demure lady who never wanted to take on anybody, to assuming this role?
You know, she said to a dear friend, Dorothy Freeman, there would be no peace for me if I kept silent about something that she thought was so extraordinarily important, and a story that she believed she could put together that would empower not the government, although the government turns out to be incredibly important in the story, but would empower citizens, ordinary people, you and I, to take action and to demand that the ethos not be, until it's proven extremely dangerous, we can go ahead and do it. How about, until it's proven safe, let's not use it too widely? And so she found that energy and that animating determination to do that. And I mean, even today sitting here, I'm awestruck by her quiet courage and her dignity and her refusal to say, even though I'm worried about my health, I will, you know, I can do this. I'm going to do this. The story must be told.
And she was vilified after the book came out. Some people called her a communist.
Hysterical
woman. What?
You know, one of the most damning comments was from the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who said she writes about the responsibility that we have for future generations in caring for the environment. She was a spinster. What does she care about the future? That's how nasty it got. When there were death threats, it was really quite an extraordinary avalanche of criticism that she faced.
You also refer to her as a servant leader. There are different types of leaders. What is a servant leader?
I think all courageous leaders who decide to push the boulder of goodness forward end up being servant leaders, meaning, Meredith, that they belong to the cause. They belong to the mission. They belong to the effort, you know, even in the darkest moments, to summon up the faith to believe that goodness can move forward and that I must be part of that. And she was a complete servant leader, you know, day in and day out, finishing that book, and then, as you alluded to earlier, trying at certain moments as she was getting sicker in 1962 and 63 to summon up her energy to go before government and congressional committees and speak about the very carefully documented dangers that she had discovered of these pesticides.
Julie, how did Rachel Carson change the conversation about the production and use of chemicals, particularly synthetic chemicals?
Well, she was really the first to raise the alarm about the whole range of synthetic chemicals that were coming into use after World War II. And she very carefully documented the die-offs of birds, the effects on other wildlife. And she was the first to say, if this is killing birds, maybe this is going to have effects on human health. So that made her the first to really bring human health into the environmental movement. But it's important to remember she wasn't anti-chemical. Yeah. She was opposed to putting chemicals into use without testing. And that's an issue that's still really very much alive today. I find I can open the book Silent Spring to almost any page and find something that's still relevant.
So how do you continue that conversation then? Because that's the role of this institute.
Yeah. It's an honor to work in that context. So I've read Silent Spring when I first took the job, and I've read it a few times since. So Silent Spring Institute has tremendously expanded the range of hormone-disrupting chemicals that we're focused on. She was focused on pesticides. And of course, it was obvious that we were spraying pesticides all over the land, and it was getting into water, and people were even using them on the window screens in their homes and putting it on shelf paper. So it was kind of obvious that those pesticides were getting out into the world. And the chemicals that we're working on now are in consumer products that weren't really thought of. You know pesticides are out there to kill something, but you don't really think about that with cleaners, cosmetics, furniture. And in fact, when Silent Spring first started industry was asserting that these chemicals would stay in the products. And it was our early work that showed that wasn't true. One of the first studies that we did measured BPA, bisphenol A, in Cape Cod groundwater. And that was when we found out it was not staying inside the can liners. In fact, it was leaching into the food and into wastewater and threatening drinking water supplies. So we really expanded the range of chemicals that you have to think about as potential endocrine disruptors and part of this new synthetic chemical world. But the other thing that we've done is to work on the solution. So if you say things should be tested before they're put into use, how are you going to test them? And I mentioned before the Safer Chemicals program that's really designed to figure out when you have a green chemist who wants to make a safer product, how do you know when you've succeeded? Right now we don't really have a full array of tests that will tell us which ones might affect the breast. And so we're trying to map that molecular pathway from a normal cell to a cancer, figure out the different steps, how to figure out whether chemicals are hitting any of those pathways.
So much still to do, but the fact that she sort of started you on this path all those years ago, do you think she had any concept of where all this would lead, Nancy?
I do. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
I mean, at the very end of her life, she was talking about the beginnings of global warming and meat production. I mean, this was someone who, you know, she was a poet and a scientist. You have to remember, if you haven't picked up Silent Spring ever or in a long time, just crack it open anyway, anywhere. This woman, you know, used her gift with language to make the rigors and truth of science available to everyone. And when you're willing to go there with her, you see things that, you wouldn't see otherwise. And she saw so much. I fantasize in my head, dear audience, about what she would advise Greta Thunberg. If she was sitting here, what would Rachel say, Greta? This is what you need to think about. Don't give up the faith. Keep translating the science in a rigorous way to people, and feed their inspiration to claim their own safety and their own right to an environment that lasts for generations and that's sustainable for all the different creatures in which we inhabit this earth.
When you go around the country, Nancy, or either talking to your students or going around the country to Fortune 500 companies, whatever, what advice do you give to these people in terms of being leaders like Rachel Carson? What is the key to that?
Well, I'm not sure there's one key, but it starts with a calling. You know, the willingness to be called to what Oliver Wendell Holmes once called a mighty purpose. You know, something that touches our hearts with fire. The boulder of goodness needs to be moved forward, my dear friends. And we all have a part to play in that, despite the cynicism and baseness and transactional default energy and cadence of our moment. So I say, don't be seduced by that cadence. You know, find your way to add goodness and go for it. And then I say over and over and over again what Margaret Mead said so many years ago: never doubt the ability of a small group of concerned citizens to change the world. Indeed, nothing else ever has. Go, go, go now. That's what I say.
And Julia, you've been doing this now for 20 years. There have been setbacks, I'm sure, along the way. How have you moved forward in those moments?
I definitely feel that the mission is calling us and calling all of us. When I was thinking about whether to take the job at Silent Spring, I was worried it was going to be too hard. And
no, hard is good. Hard is good.
Well, it turned out hard is good. It's been incredibly rewarding. And as I was moaning around the neighborhood to my fellow moms, they were completely unsympathetic and 100%, oh, you have to do that.
And what about the future now, the road ahead? What does it look like?
Well, I have two big goals for Silent Spring and for the environmental health world more broadly. The first is to really develop the tools to sort out which chemicals affect the breast. so we can get those chemicals out of products. And the second, yes,
Where are we in that? Where are we in that?
well, that's been an important part of our work for the past several years. So we've identified 500 genes that are relevant to pathways to breast cancer, and begun testing chemicals in breast cancer cells and in breast organoids, which are collections of normal breast tissue, and trying to develop the knowledge to understand what is the fingerprint or signature of a breast carcinogen, so that we can then use that knowledge to predict before chemicals go into wide use, or among those thousands of chemicals that are in use that haven't ever been tested, which ones are going to affect the breast. It's part of work that EPA is doing, but we're the ones who are really focusing on the effects on the breast. But I have my second big goal, which is, in the meantime, while we are sorting through which are the safer alternatives, I think it's important to greatly expand our exposure science, to empower everybody in every community health department to really track exposures, to know what's in your body, and to be able to do interventions and see if they work to reduce your exposure. Some of you have tried Detox Me Action Kit, which is the beginning of this idea where you can collect your own urine sample and get it tested. And I think this needs to be greatly expanded so that it becomes part of community health and precision medicine. You know, we've spent a lot of money developing tests for genes, but most cancer is not due to inherited genes. So we need to fill out the environment side of that equation.
Yeah.
I know you wanted to bring Gwen up here to sort of expand on your remarks.
Yes, there's another person here who has some really important national insights on what the future holds for this field. I'd like to introduce Gwen Koehn. Gwen is now the acting deputy director of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and she's been an incredible mentor for me personally and for Silent Spring Institute. She's also the brains and the force behind the National Institutes of Health, Breast Cancer and Environment Research Program. I'm incredibly touched that she's here today. Gwen invited me to Long Island to the first meetings of the NIH Breast Cancer Program, and she's been giving us wise advice ever since.
Well, thank you, Julie. It's really, truly an honor to be here. And congratulations to Silent Spring Institute on 25 years of amazing work and amazing partnerships. When I started this work in breast cancer and environment in the late 90s, the motivation was that community activists and advocates said, there's cancer in my neighborhood and I think the environment is causing it. Can you please do work to figure that out? And there was a lot of pushback. Scientists were not really interested in studying this. But because of the perseverance and the stick-to-itness of the advocacy communities, we saw bills launched in Congress that directed the NIH to take this on. And it was through listening and in my role at the Institute, listening to community partners, breast cancer survivors, to understand why this work was so important. And then I had the good fortune to meet Julie and the other members of the Silent Spring Institute and the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, and it changed everything. This group, plus others that I met in other parts of the country, really motivated me to keep this work going for over 15 years. Our Breast Cancer and Environment Research Program is in its 15th year, and the first week of November, we'll have our final public meeting where we'll be talking about all that we've accomplished together, advocates and scientists, not only in discovering what chemicals are related to changes in puberty, breast cancer carcinogens and increasing breast cancer risk, but also methodologies to talk to the public, to talk to scientists, to talk to healthcare providers about these very critical windows of susceptibility in the breast, in pregnant women. All the work that's been done here at Silent Spring is not only about older women who get breast cancer, it's about pregnant women who carry these chemicals in their body and how it might set up the future generations for these risks. It's about how our children are exposed to so many different things in our house and these consumer products, and how endpoints in childhood are related to this, and how that may change the trajectory for risks as they age. And so, Julie and her team have really been innovators. They have taken on these questions. They've read the literature deeply and have identified opportunities. They've taken on studies with partners in California, in Massachusetts, and now in Chile. And they have also listened to the women that they've worked with who said, we would be happy to be part of your studies, but please tell us what you learn. And so the whole field of reporting back research, I believe, started with these conversations. And Julie and her team have been just amazing pioneers in returning research results to study subjects. And it has changed everything. She's also been a go-getter in terms of communicating the science, looking at people's websites and formative organizations, trying to let them know that they're not up to date with what the current science is, thinking about what the strength of the evidence means and how we communicate that to journalists, to other important people who need to know, and to really just continue this vision and working towards it. Julie also served as a member of our National Advisory Council at the NEHS for 4 years. And although maybe I gave you some advice, you gave us as an institute 4 amazing years of advice, and which, all of us as leaders in the federal funding world really took to heart. So I thank you so much for the work, your leadership, for being a mentor to many trainees. Lots of people have come through Silent Spring and have understood how to do research with communities. And that's the future, because there are so many more questions to be answered about breast cancer, about other cancers, and about many of these chemicals that you have been studying. So thank you. It's been a pleasure to be part of it and to support that work.
I think it's wonderful that women are leading the charge. I suppose that's not surprising, but it's the women who are the warriors. Not that there aren't a lot of great men involved, but people like you who started 20 years ago, grassroots, saying, I won't be silenced, essentially. We need to find this out. Rachel Carson spoke about the moral imperative as well, that every human being has the right to their health, and that was an important message she wanted to get out to the public.
Absolutely. I mean, Rachel's gauntlet that she dropped before, millions of Americans and ultimately the world was, what does it mean to be alive and be part of this incredibly both strong and fragile, what she called the web of life, right? Which isn't just about the human life, it's about the life of all kinds of creatures and this, again, integrated, interdependent, strong but fragile web of life. She used to say, she loved to quote Albert Schweitzer, the reverence for life that we all have, whether we have boxed it away in servitude to some other goal, the reverence for life, and as she said, the obligation to endure gives us the right to know. And so I think that, the gauntlet she dropped before us is even more important today, right? What does it mean to be a citizen of our global village and try and be a fiduciary of the web of life that sustains us all and right now has great fragility at a number of really critical parts of that web.
And Julie, Gwen, what can we do, everybody in this room right now, to start making a difference as citizens?
Oh, I have to very first thank everyone for supporting Silent Spring Institute and making this work possible.
But what are the little steps you can take every day?
Well, I think we developed a smartphone app called Detox Me that gives little steps. So Ruth Ann Rudell has said we can think about this as like when you have the 10,000 steps that you need to walk, you can make little steps in your life to go fragrance-free and read the labels and avoid parabens. And now I'm so proud that our work has made it possible to buy furniture without flame retardants. And we're seeing some of the big box stores like Home Depot and Target and Walmart and so on screening their products for some of the chemicals that are on our worry list. So you can tell retailers that you care about the health effects of the products that you're buying.
Do you remember the first time we met at my apartment and all I had was scented candles everywhere? Thought, oh my God.
I was not focused on that, I can assure you.
They're not gone, they're in a closet, but I haven't quite tossed them yet. Nancy.
Well, I use my candles on my porch outside every summer.
Oh, okay, good. Phew. Ladies, thank you so much.
Thank
what a
you,
wonderful
Meredith.
conversation.
Thank you.
you.